How's that? Okay. Yes. Hello from California.
Morning, Parks. How's everything going out there?
It's hot already.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
More than I can say for West Cumbria, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Let's see. Hold on a second.
We have Bretton coming in now.
Okay. And Alicia said Leighton as well too?
Yeah, and George Ohan.
Okay.
Hey.
There's Bretton. Afternoon, Bretton.
Hey, Bretton. I'll see who's on mute, so Bretton, I'll take Bretton off mute.
Keep Bretton muted. Uh-oh.
Is that okay, Bretton? Oh, you can't hear me, can you?
What did you say, Park?
Wait, can I just mute Dr. Gallo and hear from the rest of you? How does that work?
Yeah, it works for me.
Good afternoon, Leighton. Good morning, George.
Hi, George.
Great morning. Great morning, everybody.
So Leighton, I'll unmute Leighton. And then I think we're all in. That's to unmute. Come on, Leighton.
I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna rename my little caption here.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why everything gets blurred together.
Well,
George is still muted.
I think it's the joy of modern technology. No matter how fast it catches up, we always find surprises along the way.
Exactly. George has his video off, so maybe that's what he prefers. It's coming on now.
Hello.
There he is.
Ahoy!
Ahoy, matey.
How you doing?
Morning, George.
What's up, guys? Thank you for having me. I have two little babies who yell at weird times, so I'm like, oh, I don't want to interrupt. So my apologies. That's why I'll just stay muted, if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine. Just jump in.
No problem at all.
I'm humbled to be here. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
We're on the top of your home. So, who would like to speak? Who would like to go first?
Well,
maybe one of you guys, or William.
Sure, no problem. Predominantly as we're still, as everyone else is still coming through, some of the primary reasons that we brought everyone together is because of the fact that with some of the recent news articles coming out regarding the recovery of the Marconi and the new shift that R.M.S. Titanic is taking company-wise, there are a number of articles that are giving a lot of misconceptions, including stuff like blowing up the wall of the Marconi room to retrieve it, treasure hunters, salvers, grave robbers, depending on which particular article and which part of UK or even stateside you're in. So, I've pretty much put everyone together here just so that we can actually have everything clarified from the direct source. I think it'd be better that way. I actually had also requested and asked Parks to join us because Parks is very, very knowledgeable, out of many of us in terms of the Marconi. And, he would be the best person to be able to probably provide answers for things along those lines. I can tell you that it's pretty much about the size of a shoebox, and it's still sitting there. But other than that, that's about as far as I go. My background on Titanic is more on the biographies of the passengers and crew.
Okay, well, for one, I would love to hear Park speak about the radio set. Being an electrician myself, I'm very, very interested in that. And if we get on to the electrical distribution of Titanic, which I think Park's well versed with, so be it. But of course, primarily, we need to talk about the misconception of the dive, aren't we? Excuse me, I'm just trying to give Mahari a nudge. I've maybe forgotten the meeting. You guys carry on.
No problem.
Okay. Well, I guess since you're trying to give me a lead in here, I'll talk. I was planning to listen for most of this, but
Sorry.
You know, it's been an argument of mine ever since we discovered that the Marconi transmitter had survived the sinking, that sooner or later we needed to bring it up to the surface. I believe that RMST is the correct agency to do this, since they have the authority recognized by the courts to recover, stabilize, display, maybe restore artifacts from the wreck for the public good, the public education. The Marconi transmitter is a milestone case where previously salvors like RMST have had permission to recover artifacts from the wreck site, not from the wreck itself. It's getting to the point, though, where the wreck itself, the bow section in this case, is deteriorating to the point that it puts a historically significant artifact at risk, that being the Marconi transmitter. And so this becomes a milestone case, a milestone decision on whether we break with previous precedent of never recovering from the wreck itself, and especially not the bow section. And does this represent a case to, to move into an era where maybe on a case-by-case basis, we remove selected artifacts from the bow section that have been deemed by competent authority as being historically significant and something to preserve for future generations. I've said many times that the wreck does not belong to us, this generation, this time. Titanic interest never seems to die. There's no expectation it will ever die in the future. And we have been privileged to have a wreck that we can explore, that we can document, that basically we can learn about Titanic from. As it continues to degrade, that's not going to be available to future generations. It will come a point where the wreck may never really go away, but it may become more unrecognizable, unexplorable. And future generations will be looking back to us for what we were able to salvage from the wreck during this period. And instead of hearing tales in the future about, some video that was taken about the radio, the world's most famous radio, I would argue, it would be much better if we had the actual apparatus itself that future generations will have to look at, to touch, whatever, and maintain that personal connection to Titanic. Okay, so I'll break and let somebody else talk.
If you don't mind, I'll pick up. Parks, thank you for that. I think, you've done a lot and taught me a lot along the way about the Marconi itself, and certainly the best person to kick this off. And, you bring up a lot of good points. And I think the big picture from us is really, over the past almost 2 years now that I've been controlling an RMST, we thought that the company really wasn't upholding sort of its responsibilities, to be candid. There was not a lot of integration with the public, specifically people outside of, the Titanic circle. And it's very important to us to really perpetuate that legacy. So our biggest point, and Dr. Gallo and I kind of started this, and maybe he thought I was crazy and probably still does, but was how do we really re-engage the public and how do we do it the right way? The people on this call are obviously aware of the benefits of going to the wreck regularly, but the broader public interest may not find it as exciting as we do, or they may need the end product. So our goal was really, how do we engage that broader group of people? How do we keep the RMST secrets, and why are we keeping those secrets? And why don't we bring them out to students, to people who are researching this, or just, the average person who's interested in Titanic? So that's short order, how we kind of came and stumbled across the Marconi is the most important piece. And, talking to people like Parks and Dr. Gallo and a lot of people from museums, Rory Golden, we found this wavering thought about how do we see this and what's the best way to go about this. And what do we do after? And I think that's the biggest misconception that I've been trying to fight, is that, you know, we're not going to extract the Marconi and keep it in my house for people to see. That makes me feel special. We really want to take it across the world, both in its physical form and virtual form. We want to be able to share it as quickly as possible with as many people as we can. And my bigger push has, you know, as much as I appreciate you guys, has been towards school children. You know, we worked with Jim Cameron with LAUSD, and the feedback we've got from that group of kids that went through the program, that a lot of you were part of, was tremendous. And I think, you know, again, Parks, to your point, is that the interest never wanes, but my job is really to grow the interest. And I think that the Marconi is a perfect example of bringing people together. I think it's an exciting project. The way we're doing it, in which I'm very proud of. I think our initial plan was a little rigid, and, you know, it was really open for public debate. But I think what we've arrived at now from a plan is something that we all feel good about, and likely not touching any piece of the superstructure is really a big thing for us. And, you know, I appreciate all of you guys and a lot of people that are not on this call for their input there. So we've crafted a plan that is by no means perfect, but I think is the most respectful way for us to reinvigorate the Titanic story and to save an artifact that I believe needs to be saved over the next couple of years.
Excellent.
Well, I will say most of you already know, probably Parks doesn't and Leighton doesn't. So I've always been anti-salvage. I have to put my hands up. Bretton knows this. I've always been anti-salvage. But when I heard about the new RMST's plan, I thought, yeah, this could work, because these guys are coming in with reverence, respect, and everything else that Titanic should have. So in such a position, I get a lot of messages from people that were still anti-salvage, which I think is a good place to be in. A little awkward sometimes, but I see myself as acting as a mediator, a go-between. And the biggest criticism I'm getting from people is, once we've gone into the wreck for the Marconi set, which is great, I'm about Bretton 100% with this. Where do we go from there? Does that give us the right to grab everything outside of Titanic from the inside of the wreck? And I think that's a difficult one to deal with. And all I'm telling people at the moment is, and feel free to correct me on this, Bretton or Dave, all I'm telling them is, at this moment, there are no plans to take anything else from the inside of Titanic.
Sure. So I'll answer this a couple of ways. The very short answer is no, it's not. You know, I called it a Trojan horse. It's not a way for us to remove one artifact and then, you know, have a free-for-all. That's by no means what we want to do. From a functional standpoint, we need to report what we intend to do at the wreck with the court. The court has only given us approval for the Marconi, nothing else. If there was any intention to do any other artifact from inside the wreck that's not related to the Marconi suite, we would have to get additional approval. From a, you know, honesty standpoint, this expedition is completely around the Marconi. It's extremely difficult to finance. It's extremely difficult to get these things together. So we will not be going out next year and having a whole new swath of ideas and what to do. And I think that's a prudent thing to do. I think we're gonna get a lot of information, data, a very small number of artifacts, and we want to digest those. We want to get those out into the world. So functionally speaking, the answer is no. I personally have no intention to take anything else out either in the future. It really is about the Marconi at this point in time. And I think after that, the most value that we'll be able to extract will be from the information we have, and then from some of the imagery to really make the Titanic wreck site something that everyone can experience. So, you know, that's the functional way of doing it. That's my personal opinion. It's a great point, and I can definitely understand that concern. So I appreciate the question.
Well, I appreciate the answer, and that gives me something to take back to such people as well. It's a good answer, and I think that will satisfy a lot of them. Thanks for that.
Cliff, let me add to what Bretton said. Ever since I've been arguing for the retrieval of this apparatus, it was always followed by the caveat: once we go into the bow section, remove an artifact, that does not open the door to wholesale plunder of the bow section. Any artifact removed from the wreck must go through a legal process and approval process on a case-by-case basis. And prior to any approval given by the courts, there has to be a case made that would sway the court. And I believe the court is the strongest protector of the people that you talk with or yourself who are anti-salvage. They're not opening the door to wholesale plunder. They're there to prevent that. In order to get them to allow permission to retrieve an artifact, each artifact is going to have to be argued on a case-by-case basis with a historical argument given for that retrieval. So I believe their fears are unfounded. In fact, the Marconi said the only reason why we're talking about it this year and not, I mean, this is not a new idea. We've been talking about this for many, many years. But the reason why action's being taken now is because the structure that was protecting this transmitter is now to the point of disintegration, and it will go from being a protector of it to putting it at risk. And that's why we're discussing it now. It was only now, after years of discussing this, it's only now that action's being taken, and that's because it's now threatened instead of being protected.
Thank you for that addition as well. Just to be clear though, I'm not anti-salvage. I was once, until I got involved with Bretton and the team. Yeah, I'm for it now, but I still get a lot of comment from those that are anti-salvage, and they kind of come to me for reasons because they know that I was on that other side of the fence. So those answers are great for me to pass on to them. So thanks for that as well, Parks.
And Cliff, I was on the other side of the fence as well, because I went to work at Woods Hole as Bob Ballard's assistant and came almost immediately after he returned from Titanic in 1986. I was with him when he heard that things were being recovered from Titanic. And for the next few years, I spoke out against any kind of salvage. And it wasn't until I wandered against rules, policy of Woods Hole, into one of the exhibits that I was able to see people interacting with those artifacts. And for me, it was an authentic experience for these people, families together, families, men, women, children independently, that there they were face to face without a Jim Cameron or a Bob Ballard or whoever between them, to have their own experience with Titanic. So that started to shift my feeling about the importance of artifacts. I agree completely about the, if we never picked up another artifact again, in my mind, it benefits the company to keep that ship as intact as possible. The whole scenario, the seascape, because you want that mystery out there, the mystery of Titanic still sitting there. But as Parks said, and Bretton too, when the Marconi fell out of multiple expeditions to Titanic, when we looked around to see what was, always that came up like, oh, this decking seems to be wearing thin, and over time we've watched that grow a bit. So, especially in 2010, I think, which Parks was with me in 2010, we got a pretty good look at it, and Parks was there more recently. So the question does become, is that what is our role in preserving the legacy of that ship and actually building the legacy of that ship and keeping it going for future generations? Are we just going to watch it crumble over time? Is that what we should be doing? And again, that's not a signal to go ahead and plunder the ship. It's just saying that we need to manage what's out there. A lot of countries are not bound by the policies, are not don't have to be under the guise of a federal court. So back in 1986, there was only a few groups that could go to Titanic. Today, it's not that difficult. If you've got enough money, I don't know, less than $1 million, you can get a ship, you can get a cheap robot, you can get a dredge, and go out to Titanic and do what you want. And there's nothing protecting that in my mind. So to be good stewards of the site, and R.M.S. Titanic Inc. has every interest in doing that, I think we've got to do that. You've got to make sure, you've got to know what's there. You got to know what condition it's in, and then you've got to respond to that. Do we leave that? Do we, you know, what do we do? And I think in this case, it's warranted that we at least go out there, take a real good look at the Marconi room, real good. And if the situation arises that we then decide we can do it without damaging the ship irreparably, then or significantly, then we make the attempt to recover. And you know, we've gone through a lot of pains to get the right team together, to get the right plan together, and have the right technology to do that. I bristle, and I'm getting more and more frustrated and aggravated when I see headlines that say salvage company, for starters. R.M.S. Titanic Inc. is not a salvage company. That we're grave robbers, ruthless grave robbers, greedy treasure hunters. And, you know, it really bothers me. I understand people if they just say it's grave robbing, and that's just the feeling they have about this. You know, if it's your own personal feeling, I got that. But I don't like it when the media and other individuals that have other goals for other plans for Titanic infect these people with notions like it's like going to Gettysburg with a shovel. We're not digging anything. You know, we don't pick up stuff and look at it and say, hey, let's leave this. No, let's keep this. You know, there's none of that crap. And so the more I see it in the media, the more I worry about, and it's tough to get reporters off this notion that it's a salvage company, or that there's money at the end of all this. And so, you know, we've got sort of still an uphill battle to fight. And I think the good news is we can begin to educate people, you know, with the things that Park said, the things that Bretton said. I think it's good for people to go through this reasoning. And just like you did, Cliff, I'm against this. And then you start to understand a little bit more about what it could be and what the real intent is. And then make up your mind. But don't do it based on these terms that are meant to ignite your emotions. Do it on the facts. You know, we can love Titanic to death and watch it crumble into the sea, but it takes a little bit more than that to manage it successfully. Sorry.
And we do have a preview, the captain's bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hope we took enough pictures of it, because that's all we have of it now. It's buried. Technology continues to improve. I'm currently writing a analysis paper, a forensic analysis paper on the Marconi based on the data that we've gathered to date. And compared to the data collection capabilities that we have today, to include high-def cameras and everything, Cameron's original 2001 imagery of the Marconi room looks a little primitive by comparison. So you can document the ship as well as you can passively, unobtrusively, but plunder is already happening at the wreck, and plunder's being done by nature itself. Those superstructures, those deck houses, are thinner steel than the hull. The hull's going to be there for a long time, long after any of us are around. It's there to stay. But the thinner steel of those deck houses has been eroded by ocean currents and corroded over the past century or so. I remember when lifting off from the deck of Titanic in 2005, we had to set down because we had a hydraulic malfunction in the mirror. I passed a segment of the overhead of what used to be the enclosure for the grand staircase. Now, this was, what is it? Less than an inch thick steel. I forget exactly how thick it is. But it had been eroded to the point where it was waving in the current like gauze fabric. And that is the fate of the topside structure. So landmarks that we're used to, like the captain's bathtub, are going to be destroyed. I mean, if you want to leave the wreck alone, fine, but you better be happy with what you've documented to date, because that's all we're going to have left. Going in there in the next year or so with newer technology to image the Marconi room, great. But then again, that technology is eventually going to become obsolete. But if we recover the actual heart of the world's most famous radio, we have it for all time. So that's, anyway, again, I'm talking too much. Bretton.
No, listen, I appreciate that. And, to touch upon what Dr. Gallo said, I think a lot of people do have this concept of these are invaluable artifacts. That is a fact. But what happens with them after is not an enriching experience. I actually have to find a way to pay for the conservation every year, right? So keeping all of those artifacts, keeping them intact, making sure they're safe, having such a great collections team as we do is not an inexpensive endeavor. And those artifacts all have to sit in the warehouse and or on tour around the world for perpetuity. So we have them to share with generations to come. So at no point are we grave robbers that are being rich. We're the worst grave robbers if we are, because everything is very expensive and very well curated. And we're so fortunate to have that staff. But at the same time, we have to figure out other avenues just to make sure that we can continue to pay for these things to be in place. So that's the one thing that I think we get frustrated about the most, because you've had people that have dedicated 25 years of their career and a lot of company funds, to be honest, to keep these things out in the public and to keep the story alive. So that's my soapbox for the day. And I think our collection staff deserves a really big, pat on the back for what they do.
Yeah, and Dave, that's the problem with the media. Logistics is a boring subject to them. They never want to talk logistics. They don't want to discuss the costs of the expedition and all the devices that you develop. I mean, we've developed new technologies just to explore the Titanic wreck. That doesn't come free. There's the boring matter of the ship's company, of the support ship. You have to pay their wages. You have to feed the crew. You have to do all this stuff. And then, as Bretton said, there's the post-expedition cost of maintaining it. It's all the details of the logistics are the best argument against this. We're money grubbing, for-profit kind of thing. But nobody ever wants to discuss that. They want to break it down to simple black and white terms that play sensationalist in the media. And I've tried to explain that, and it always gets cut from any interview I ever do because they find it boring. Nobody wants to discuss the logistics, but therein lies the crux. Therein lies your best rebuttal of the claim that we're just in this for the money.
Right. And pay no attention to the pirate behind me.
I thought that was Captain Morgan.
That's my great grandfather. No, it's not.
Oh, I thought that was what you were drinking tonight.
Same artist, by the way, Don Mates. Same artist.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down this path a bit more because I'm bitter about this constant hammering that I see that here's a company that's finally heading in the right direction. They've got, through Bretton's guidance, the company's finally doing the right thing. We've left the cave in Atlanta. Bretton, has been to Europe. We've been to Belfast, to Cherbourg, Kolb. We're now with you guys in social media. We've opened up the data that we've got as much as we can to the public, and yet there's this constant hammering. And the company has got, I would put it this way, limited resources, because like any company, we have revenue coming in, but that's from museums. And guess what? There is now COVID. So I get really irritated, especially when you think that 2010. We were approached by R.M.S. Titanic Inc., the old one, to be part of this expedition and to do a scientific expedition at Titanic, which meant that we were going to do some very boring stuff, go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And you've seen the results of that. Most people have maps of Titanic, sonar maps, and then optical maps of Titanic. Well, we had a very strong partnership back then. We had R.M.S. Titanic, Woods Hole, NOAA, National Park Service, and others as well. Everyone got along great. Everyone participated. It was acclaimed. NOAA, some of the NOAA people wrote articles. Jim Delgado that was on there wrote articles acclaiming the expedition. We had meetings since then. And then about a year and a half ago or something like that, there was an announcement made. Now that Titanic, Bretton was back in, in the helm, at the helm of Titanic, the partnership lives. And everyone agreed. NOAA agreed, National Park Service agreed, all the players, Woods Hole agreed that we are now together again, same partnership, and we're going to launch phase 2 using the data we collected in 2010 to go out and do more at the site at Titanic, because finally we had a roadmap. And then suddenly, kaboom, within a few days, Woods Hole was gone. National Park Service was gone. NOAA was gone. And now they're on the opposite side of the fence from us. And that really, you know, we don't exactly have an explanation for that directly. I can guess at some of the things that had happened. But like I said, it almost immediately happened overnight. And now they've become more antagonists than they are protagonists. And I just don't get that. And so it irritates me that they know us. They've worked with us. They know what our plans are. They were part of the planning for the coming expedition. So what gives with that, you know? And in some ways, and I'm a consultant to Titanic, so I can take a few liberties with what I say, but they need to back off. Because, you know, the more they get up this emotional stuff, the more I'm going to be outspoken about, hey, wait a minute. Where in here did you say that we ran afoul of each other? We just put out a press release on a Wednesday, and by Monday that they agreed with, and by Monday everyone was gone and left just the R.M.S. Titanic sitting there with really no excuse, so or reasoning. So that irritates me because I blame that gang a bit for causing some of the emotional response from the public in general. I'll leave it at that. I need to get that off my chest because having been on the other side of that and having lived through this statement, the wood's holier than thou, you know, the elites. So to me, you know, if you had a PhD, yeah, Titanic. If you were affluent, you can get to Titanic. But if you're the people that, as Park said, the future generations, the kids, the people in rural America, inner city America that Bretton's been reaching out to, if you're just a person, good luck to having your own personal experience with Titanic. You can go watch my documentary, you can buy my books, come to my lecture, but you know, that's about it for you. So, and that contrast between the elite, which I used to be part of that gang, and the people in general, I was born part of this gang, really bugs me an awful lot. So you can edit that out if you want, Cliff, and but I ain't being quiet no more. You know, I'm sick of this crap. So there you have it.
I think the most frustrating part for Dr. Gallo and I is that, you know, I'm okay that some people don't like me and I've gotten over it, right? Being involved in Titanic, that happens to everyone, but it was really to the detriment of the community and the public that we couldn't have partners at Woods Hole. And, you know, it was the first I did. I was really excited. Hey, we had all this great information. We shared it. We can move forward. They seemed to think it was a great idea as well until, you know, 2 days later, they had to think over the weekend and change their mind. And that hurt the public. It didn't hurt me. It's all of RMST's intellectual property, so we still get to use it. But the ability to spread that out over a larger group of people who'd be able to ascertain things from it would have done wonders for the community. And to say no to that is embarrassing, I think. And it's sort of sad that, you know, we lost sort of power in the community just because of a couple of people. It didn't get us down. I think what we've done, and I think all of you guys here is testament to that we've moved forward past it, but it is unfortunate that it's a small group of people that have a lot of value to add together and they don't want to play ball because maybe it's me, maybe it's Dr. Gallo, I'm not sure, but it's certainly one of us.
Yeah, well, you know, we did find out that it was one person with ties to Woods Hole that had a prop, and also ties to Titanic, that had an issue with this whole thing. And Woods Hole didn't just walk away from the partnership. They actually purged the whole place of Titanic. The Advanced Imaging Visualization Lab, out. The people involved, out. And no more Titanic. And as Bretton said, you know, it all happened over like 2 days, but this one individual, and I can guess who that individual is, raised such a fuss that Woods Hole collapsed like that. And to having been there for 30 years, you know, that bugged me. And also, I know Bill Lang, who put his whole heart and soul into Titanic, out. So that's okay. And again, it fits this elitist versus not elite, normal people bit. And, you know, hopefully that goes, the public will eventually see through some of this stuff that's going on.
Well, as an outsider, so to speak, I have a great interest in, you know, watching and rooting for RMST. And I'm very much encouraged by the recent steps taken by Bretton with Jim Cameron to hit the educational aspect of the Titanic wreck. And I think that Dave, what you were talking about, your frustrations, I heard through your discussion of your frustrations what could be indications of a practical and successful strategy to take with NOAA and Woods Hole. And that is to not engage with them in the tit for tat kind of stuff, but just to press forward and emphasize the educational value and the intellectual value of continuing to explore the wreck and recover artifacts that are in danger of being lost. And if you stay with that message, then you put NOAA and Woods Hole in opposition to what is a good message. You force them into and make them look like the bad guy, because they're trying to make RMST look like the bad guy.
Yeah.
And they're actually using past incarnations of RMST as evidence of it.
Of course.
But to just continue to push forward with the direction you're going now, emphasizing the education and the sharing, that's where you'll get the popular support and put NOAA and Woods Hole on the defensive.
Yep, I agree completely, Parks. Yeah, and that's why, I express my own frustration, but also, it takes a valuable resources to always have to quote unquote defend ourselves from, and I should let Bretton speak to that, but to me, it's just hammering the company time and time again with these issues, which, it should be difficult, as we all know, to go to Titanic and to recover anything from Titanic. You shouldn't necessarily, without, just trust someone because they want to go to Titanic. And I think, the company recently has done due diligence to try to stay close to the court and to be mindful of all this stuff. But I agree completely, Parks, that the best way to get to feel better about this is to push forward, and because then at the end of the day, you've got an actual product that you can share with the public at large. So yeah, I agree.
Guys, it's me, George, film producer here in California. This is fascinating. I'm like, my hand's about to fall off as much notes as I have here. I think that you got what you're doing. I'm not one of these people who have followed the Titanic forever. William Brower Jr. got me to get the hook recently, and now I'm in. I can't not look at Titanic information without a day passing now. Thank you, William. My wife's like, you're looking at that? And now my wife's jumping in, watching these videos with me. So I'm that little kid who's new to the gang, but as a filmmaker, I hear you. And I hear what you're saying, and this is worth saving. This is worth fighting for, and it's worth taking on the bullies. It's worth taking on the bad boys to say, you know what, dude, you're wrong, and this is why. And I got a few notes here with Cliff and David. If this was a documentary, or if this was my brand, if I had to create a brand for RMST or for the message, Cliff and David were the anti. They didn't believe in this. This is awesome. You got the guys who are really smart and really care about this stuff, and they were anti. And now they've changed their minds. Okay, well, that's a red flag for me. Well, what happened? Why did you change your mind? I would love to know that. So that gets me as an audience member hooked and learning and getting information. So I love that. The other part is I would go and question the person at the National Park Service and say, so, hey, there's the Marconi over here being recovered. This is why they're doing it with virtual reality, with artificial intelligence, with the data, with everything they're going to have here once they have it in physical form. Do you support this? Yes or no? Do you support this? No? Oh, really? Why? Let me find out. Let me hear you tell me on camera why you don't support this. Let's get the facts. Let's understand why you don't support this. The other thing is, I will do the same thing with NOAA. Who's the lead guy that makes this decision at NOAA? How you doing? I'm George. I have a question for you. There's these people recovering this thing. Do you think it's a good idea for us to have the Marconi here on Earth without water surrounding it? Yes or no? Yeah, you do? Okay, so why do you think it's a bad idea those guys go and get it next year? Okay, and then I'll let my audience decide if NOAA's doing what's right or what's wrong for our future generations. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I'm going to take her to Las Vegas so we can touch a piece of rust. So that's what we're going to do. Anyways, the third part is with so much data, with all these companies coming out in Silicon Valley, really close to where I live, with the information that we have, we're not even in the infancy of being able to input the data that we do have, that we have recovered, and let the machine learning, let the computers come up with some conclusions for us to help us with the exploration and the expeditions while this stuff still exists here on real life before it gets washed away. So like, if somebody's watching this and they're seeing that, they're like, oh yeah, how come people are not supporting RMST? What? That is important. We do have the new machine learning. We do have all this stuff to help this mission now. The timing is now. This generation is now. The other thing is the details of the logistics. Yeah, media is going to think that's boring until you turn the details of the logistics into finance, until you only talk numbers. And then they're going to take it as a thumb in the eye. And that's what we have to do. You talk about the finance, about the details of the logistics, but that's the blood, sweat, and tears of why people should support RMST. Because the details, because it's like, dude, you couldn't do it if I gave you the money. If I give you $1 million right now, you're going to go eat shit. You're not going to be able to go accomplish this mission. You don't have these 30 smart dudes here doing this for you. You don't have that team. So like, yeah. that's pretty damn important. And then I love this. It's like when we talk about the details of the logistics, that's when it's clearly fleshed out that we are the worst grave robbers. Dude, we suck at grave robbing. The numbers tell you we're terrible at this. I would have never made a good pirate. I would have been swabbing the deck every day. Like, if you want to call me a grave robber, then you better call me the worst damn grave robber in history. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take grave robber, but you better put worst in front of it. You better put the word worst in front of it, and I'll take the title. PBS.
Just what Bretton said recently is that, we treat the site as if it were a grave. We've never seen any suggestion of human remains there, but nevertheless, that's the way we treat it. We don't dig in the sediments.
I feel that honor on the call. I feel that. It's not by what you guys are saying. It's how you're saying what you're saying. I'm like, damn, these guys give a shit about this for real. This is not a gimmick. This is not a paid advertisement that they're trying to get me to listen to. I'm like, oh my God, these guys really care about something. So
when I was in Belfast with Bretton, I didn't know what to expect from this young whippersnapper guy that was now jumping into the seat with Titanic. And I tried to tell him, hey, it's not like a business. Wait, it's a very, very contentious, different factions and stuff. But he said something that stopped me in the tracks. He said, we need to do the right thing by the ship. Holy smoke. That I was stunned by that. That was very refreshing. But so, you're absolutely right, George. I think what you hear is a lot of passion from Parks, because this has been his baby for so long, from Bretton, because he's at the helm of this incredible company, from me, because I lived both sides of the equation, and then from all of you that have, the enthusiasts have really had a lifetime of emotion sort of tied up in the ship. So, I think some of that emotion comes to the surface. So when someone lobs a grenade in and says, oh, it's grave robbing, or they're going to blow apart the ship, or holy smoke, who do you think you're talking? Give us a break.
I did an interview with a reporter on a UK thing about a month or two ago, and she asked me at the end of it, how much money have you made pursuing Titanic? And I had to laugh. I said, number one, I have probably thousands of dollars invested in, a lot of books and other things. Number two, I have never been paid to go to the wreck site. I've had my expenses reimbursed, but I've never been paid. The only time I ever received a check was for the book that I co-wrote with Jim Cameron. That was from the publisher. And she was shocked. She thought, I thought you'd gotten rich off Titanic. I said, no, I'm in the hole because of Titanic. This is not a money-making venture. To pursue Titanic in a passionate sense, you do not make money, period.
The last thing that wraps that up is the conservation piece is, could the next generation look back and say, what did you guys do while that thing was here, while the Marconi was here? What did you do? Dude, well, oh my God, how shameful. Yeah, we got to do it. We got to do it. And then the fact that the sense of urgency, there's no foreign protection. If some Saudi prince wants to throw 10 million at this tomorrow morning, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're not gonna do nothing.
That's an important point, George, and I appreciate that because there is, right, the capabilities to get out there and use these tools is getting more common, right? Is it still expensive? Yeah, but it's the accessibility is certainly opening up for people. And to the extent that the court and RMST are not in place protecting the rec, you know, I hate to say it, but it could become an open season item and you have to have someone in place. And, you know, I think that most of the rules that we follow are fair. I really do. Are they easy to follow? Absolutely not. But it makes sure that there's checks and balances across who is doing things, what is going on at the rec site. And I think that's the most important point that people miss is someone needs to be in place protecting the rec site and have active stance out there, but also be aware of everyone else going. You know, 3 years ago, RMST was fighting against people like Ocean Gate and anyone else who wanted to go to the rec site. And now we all work together. We talk about ideas. We share some of our information to make sure that if they are indeed going to go, that they have the best things around them and the best resources available to ensure that it's safe for themselves and also respectful of the rec site. So, you know, I think it's a great point you bring up. And it's another part of what we're doing is we work with everyone that goes out to the rec site to ensure, one, they're doing things appropriately and also reporting that to the court as well. So that's all on file.
Yeah, I think that in a documentary or something would create that sense of urgency. But then this whole thing that I just talked about should be followed up with a Patreon account where an average person like me can donate my $50 a month. And I think that can, like, beyond the museum resources, if the average American can give $10 a month, all the fans from all these little Facebook groups, I'm sure that'll be tens of thousands of dollars per month with the proper campaign.
Yeah.
With just these types of Zoom calls with a couple of people who know about this, and my Patreon contribution gets me in on this call. Oh, you got my money. You got my money. I'm in.
Okay, so you're thinking like a virtual convention, kind of
all the time, every month. Every month, I'm just part of this this Titanic group. You pay $50 a month, and you're part of this once a month Zoom call. And it's like instead of me paying to go to the Rotary or the whatever, it's like me going to the movies. But I'm coming in and I'm talking to the guys here about the Titanic. This is awesome. There's no better way to build an army of people who trust you and love you, and they're giving you money for the information. We're competing against Netflix. We're competing against anybody else who's paid media, and I know you will get their money because your content is more valuable to that group of people. It could be one of the streams of income that just trickle in, one Patreon account, every monthly a GoFundMe for a different thing that we're going to offer from whoever. There's just, you could have 10 or 15 different trickle campaigns coming in, and you'll be surprised by the end of the year, you'll have hundreds of thousands of dollars just from donations of people you never would have even thought of.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point for sure.
Yeah. Now I should say with George, you know, a lot of his work also stems from his work with multiple veterans and his time in the military. And one of the programs that he has, which is what kind of crossed my attention when I originally worked with him a little while back ago, was a program called Teach, Coach, Mentor, which involves a lot of the public schools. And so, you know, that's one of the primary reasons why I had invited him into the discussion for today to, you know, see what all could be available on the educational front as well too, just to help, you know, solidify the foundation for the next generation.
Yeah, thank you for that. When I was in Los Angeles at UCLA at the Anderson School of Management, I started going to Compton High School just after school on my own and started a program called Teach, Coach, Mentor. And that was the motto from the Army's Sergeant School, Teach, Coach, Mentor, when I was a sergeant in the Army. And basically, whatever I would learn from this top business school, I would go in and start teaching 15 and 16-year-old kids this information. And within 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, these little hustlers are out there on Instagram and Facebook, and they're making like $500, $600, $700 a week, selling T-shirts, selling whatever, making videos, doing stuff. And I'm like, see, you don't need to be spending $100,000 at UCLA. You can just teach this stuff from YouTube to these kids, and they're learning the concept. So what you're doing, that's why I really care about it. If we teach people to love this and investigate and explore this thing early on, this is going to create a lifetime of this exploration and expedition, and Titanic might just be the start of it. This is the catalyst for exploring every single thing else. And of course, there's a virtual reality element to this. One thing that we work with Impact Releasing is bringing accessible media to deaf people, blind people. We have a thing called Deaf Flicks, Blind Flicks, all these different things, flicks, like we're setting them up right now. And the reason it started, my buddy Mark Bovey, he actually was working at Universal for 20 years. And he said he took 2 of his deaf friends to a rock concert. And everyone's like, why would you go to a rock concert with a deaf guy? He goes, because when you get them drunk, you find out which one the fun one is. And it's like, just because the dude's deaf, he's out there, he's partying, he's having a good old time. And it's like, just because somebody does not have access, they're in a wheelchair, maybe they want to still go touch that piece of rust of the Titanic. They want to go through this virtual reality thing of the Titanic and experience that. And it's this little wolf pack of people here that get to make that possible. This is life-changing. This is world-changing. This is amazing.
Well, and this is now the time too, because the first generation of Titanic explorers, the Ballards, the Camerons, those of us who've learned from them, we're aging out. And we've got, in these early years of Titanic exploration, I mean, Ballard found a Titanic that doesn't exist anymore. If you look at the 1985, 86 Titanic, that doesn't exist anymore. What exists today is a shadow of that. And all that corporate knowledge from this first generation of explorers is going to go to the grave with them if it isn't documented. I have to write a book. I don't want to write a book, but I have to write a book because I need to document everything that I've found or been involved with, just so that somebody else can pick it up later and not have to, relearn the wheel, or at least hear about the Titanic of the past. So yeah, we're at that point where we seriously need to figure out how to collect the corporate knowledge, the collective knowledge of the first generation of Titanic explorers, so that the next generation can build upon that, and again and again and again.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I didn't even think about that. Collecting the corporate knowledge. I think we can get some Silicon Valley tech company interested in the sexy of that. It's like, oh, how do you do human intelligence collection? How do you do data extraction from a human and then able to organize that or curate that content? So that's a phenomenal point.
I don't want you building a replica of me.
It's already done.
I don't think anybody wants you to build a replica of me.
So now, Parks, I will say this much: you're definitely right about the ship being a shadow of her former.
Last year was very important too, and this is another point I want to bring up, because we've got another element here that we have to deal with collectively, and that's the fact that the wreck no longer belongs to us. There is an entire ecosystem that has taken root at the Titanic wreck, that has made it its home. It's an artificial reef. And we not only have to be respectful about the historical aspects of the wreck and the people who died during the disaster and everything, but we also have to be careful not to disrupt what is now a very vibrant ecosystem that is called the wreck its home now. We're going to be disturbing a community is what we're going to be disturbing whenever we go to the wreck. It was such a change from 2010 when we last imaged the wreck. In 9 years, the rate of proliferation of life forms, the growth of things that we had noticed before that are blossoming now, it was amazing. In 2005, when I dove on the wreck, it felt so dead. I was expected to be spooked out, but it was so dead that it didn't even give off dead vibes. It was like nothing. You could look at it clinically, because I just didn't feel any emotion coming from the wreck because it was so dead. But then last year, I was struck by how alive the wreck is. Everywhere you looked, there was life. And so that's another factor that we have to take into account that we haven't really considered before, that other beings inhabit the wreck now.
That's true. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at one point, there's even been rumors that it's roughly about 250,000 new types of bacteria and microorganisms that have been found within, just within the past 15 years or so, around that vicinity and such.
Yeah, I'll leave it to the biologists to discuss that, because I'm certainly no expert on biology or marine. I mean, I see a fish, a crab, a starfish. That's my extent of knowledge. But it was obvious even to a layman like myself that the wreck is just teeming with life.
So the ship that brought death also brought life eventually. It's a very good point, Parks. I like that.
Yeah, and the importance of that too is very rarely do we have something like that, as Park said, an artificial reef, where we know almost exactly when it was deposited on the seafloor. So, which is in the deep seafloor, like this has been, which is great. And besides the science, which we're learning an awful lot about Titanic and the deep ocean as well, those currents that Park mentioned earlier are pretty interesting. And either side of Titanic, there's these giant dunes that are eventually moving across the seafloor that they dwarf Titanic in some cases. So we're learning a lot about the deep sea, but we're also learning a lot about technology. A lot of the technology that began, Titanic, the Argo system and the like, a lot of the stuff we see today go right back to those initial technologies. Not just the technology, the cameras and the systems, but also the technique. How do you work around a shipwreck with either a submarine or a camera? And Jim Cameron, the kinds of things that he did making his movies, stunning, absolutely stunning, and something most academics would not even try to do. But some of the things difficult, some of the other things too, in academia, you light as much light face forward, full blast, blam, light it up. And Jim was doing these things with low lighting, mood setting, low angle stuff, and incredible. I mean, it brought out a lot more. It made you think a lot more than the face full. So, Titanic's just full of these things that, besides the ship itself, are now in play in other areas of science and engineering.
Definitely. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes in a lot of ways, Cameron's out of box methodology, really helped on encouraging the importance of exploration. I can say that much, just from working along with the local schools down here. More times than not, when you say Titanic, about 30% of the students will say James Cameron and then goes to the abyss, which is usually a surprise because I'm usually waiting to hear James Cameron, Leonardo DiCaprio. So, equally just as good on the visual effects, I'll say that much. But the love story, well, we know otherwise. But but still, though, the just the fact of the way that he approaches, not only the ship itself, but also, the amount of planning behind it and the way that it's executed. You can see without a shadow of a doubt, how it is opening up a lot of doors of inspiration. And so, these are things that need to be addressed and also utilized, I think, with R.M.S. TI, especially with them being slammed in the media as often as they are. So, Bretton, as long as you keep working with the public schools and keep your head high with this, I think that will be one of the best options.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're really excited about it, and it's been one of the more rewarding experiences. I like working with Dave and Parks and the rest of you guys, but going into these schools and seeing these kids get engaged, I remember, subject matter in history was kind of tough for me to hold attention in 3rd and 4th grade. And these kids are asking questions that sometimes I have a hard time answering about Titanic, and they do their reading ahead of time and they have all these interesting thoughts. And, sometimes it's funny. It's like that education is just creating this idea that, hey, there's something else to do, right? We don't have to all go into finance or be a lawyer. Like people like the guys on this call and a lot of others, they're doing incredible things out there and changing the world and discovering what I think is a new world in the deep sea. And, planting that seed in kids early on is really exciting. And if when 500 ends up doing something on this scale, like Dr. Gallo has, or like Parks has, all the better. So that's really the fun part of it. Don't get me wrong, the expedition is very exciting, but it's when we come home, what we do with it is what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I think the skills issue is it's a biggie. As I think some of you know, I used to do these school lectures in the UK. You would get classes of maybe 30, maybe 100 kids in one school. Okay, I didn't have any artifacts to show them, but I had a few good slideshows, and you could get these children sitting down and their eyes would light up when they saw the wreck of Titanic, and they were really, really interested in it. And to keep that young audience captivated and get them interested in the early age, that is one great way of carrying on the legacy of Titanic. And I think it's something that would really, really should push. Difficult now with the COVID situation, I know, but it's, I think, Bretton, that's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you.
And then now speaking with the legacy of Titanic, you know, I do want to also, you know, thank you, Leighton, for joining us as well too. Leighton actually was able to, very generous enough back in '97 or so, to release Polar the Titanic Bear, written by his relative, the Speddens. And you know, obviously, if you 97 film and also a majority of the Titanic books, you see Douglas playing with his top, and this is one of the same family. And so, you know, I just want to also just take a moment to say thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me. And who knew discovering a book in one's family's barn? Actually, it was several steamer trunks, 27 photo albums, diaries, things that had belonged to the Spen family that my grandmother had inherited from the house in Tuxedo Park. And I found it right after I graduated from high school. And so I asked my grandfather if I can have these pieces, and then friends of mine who were curators at museums suggested I should publish it as a children's book, and then eventually got to Madison Press. And then by 1994, it became a book, and then it sold over, I think, over 1 million copies. And during the 90s and early 2000s, I think I visited over several hundred schools doing a presentation on the book. And I graduated from an old-fashioned slide projector to the smartboard technology. So that was interesting, but I think the kids really enjoyed the 1970s slide projector program the most that I used. They loved playing with it as I was setting it up. But it's been a very interesting experience. Introducing the Titanic to the next generation of people. Especially, I'm interested only through the passenger side. I'm not really interested in the architecture of the ship. As you know, I'm not one of those rivet counters, but I really like the stories of the passengers, the crew, and the experience that humans had on board the ship. And that's my direction into the Titanic, is not the technology from 1912 or the construction of the ship. So I have a different approach. I feel that true treasure of the ship is the people that were on board, and the stories and the incredible assemblage of different characters and people who did not realize they were stepping onto a page of history, and their reaction to this final moments is what intrigues me. And of course, the weird part is the Speddens were one of the few families that actually survived intact and brought a new member into the household. We kind of inherited what's her name? The maid, Ellen Bird, the maid from the Strausses. And then she came to live with my family in Tuxedo Park. So we wound up getting a new member of the family. And somehow, because of that, of the connection to the Strausses, I get involved with a lot of the Strauss family activities when they get together for the Titanic stuff. And Joan Adler, who runs the Strauss Historical Society, lives around the corner from me. So we have that connection. Wow. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for making that book available. I read it and purchased the polar bear doll for my daughter as she was growing up. She loved it at the time. She hates Titanic now because Dad won't stop talking about it. But that's my fault, not yours. But
it's been very. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting experience. Having this connection to the Titanic, and then the story of the child and the and its sad ending, and just the numerous connections that this kid has developed, especially now that he's dead, he's got so many new friends, and people are constantly wanting to come by the graveyard and you know, Greenwood Cemetery and drop off stuffed teddy bears. I keep suggesting that they should give it to hospitals and stuff. But it's amazing that the kid is living on, which is what I think is important.
Well, I'm glad for the opportunity to be able to thank you personally for.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, and I think in a lot of ways, it just it's the perfect example of Titanic's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you know, here we are 108 years later. We're all very diverse, just like the ship herself was, and you know, we're still talking about it and still looking at the means to preserve her and to keep the story going as much as possible.
And I think the fact that there's so many different stories of the human interactions on board permeates through all class and culture and race and all these, you know, intersectionality situations that people are now discovering about human connections. And I think it's just amazing how people find an angle to get connected to a ship and a moment in time, which is a very powerful thing.
Well, this wreck is what it is because of the stories. I mean, there's a lot of shipwrecks on the bottom of the ocean. There's been disasters that have had a higher toll of human life than this one. But it's the stories of Titanic that you're talking about that make this, you know, why we're here today. Why are we so interested in this particular wreck? Why does this particular wreck require so much protection and care? And why do we want it? Why do we want to save it for the future? It's the stories.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think all of us that have had relatives on the ship, we all have a different story to tell. Those are our individual stories, and they all make up the great picture. Whether we have historians who concentrate mainly on the ship, maybe, or certain aspects of the ship, but you know, we all have to have our little specialist subjects, and collectively, yeah, it all comes together, I think.
It's the pieces to the puzzle. It's what it is.
Yeah. And with every generation, there's a new angle to look at and a new perspective for a new generation, which is, I find amazing. I got invited to the 2012 thing on the Intrepid with Mr. Palmer from Australia. But what I found extraordinary was there was this whole new generation of 20-year-olds who were obsessed with the Titanic, who were dressing up as, you know, in, you know, vintage 1912 tuxedos and stuff that were somehow invited to the situation. And I was just blown away by, there's a whole new generation coming up with a whole new interest, and which I find is very healthy and enlightening.
It's exciting because, you know, again, I love to give my collections team a pat on the back, but they continue to research these stories. And, you know, there's even stories where we've corrected things we thought about passengers. And over the last 2 years, there's been a lot more work focused around that. You know, I've been really fortunate to work with some good people on the media side for, again, what do we do with all this great content we'll have from the expedition? And that's been our big push, and that's what everyone is interested in. And I think, you know, you bring up a great point. We've had a lot of documentaries about the ship and a lot of people hypothecating when and if it will degrade, but now it's really exciting time because we have this research about all of these passengers across each class, and each story is more exciting than the other one. And, you know, I'm fortunate that, you know, people like Dr. Gallo have to take my call and answer my questions. So, you know, being a sponge for those kind of things is amazing. And there's nothing that we've wanted to do more in this next push of media and then get those stories out there. Because to your point, it really does draw the community back in, and it gives, there's always someone you relate to. And I think everyone's found their passenger and their storyline that kind of dives in. So it's been an exciting time. And again, I really can't thank the collection staff enough for the work they do on that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty illustrative that throughout all the various managements of RMST, at the exhibits, one thing has remained constant, is the boarding pass you give the guest, and they find out at the end whether that personage lived or died. It's been a constant. No matter how you run the exhibits, they love that.
I have a confession to make. Bretton, sorry. So in 2012, when we ran the Mediport Titanic exhibition, I kind of cottoned on to that, and I used that same formula. Sorry, Bretton. But you know, we had the board at the end of the exhibition with details of passengers on various passengers on the tickets, and people absolutely loved it. They thought it was great, and some of them were spending more time looking at the passenger list to find out how their passenger had fared than they were looking through the exhibition. Perhaps that's a little reflection of our exhibition, but they did it. They really loved it, and it's little things like this that you can come up with that really makes a difference to a lot of people.
Indeed.
The biggest change we had pre-COVID was we put out screens with much more information and photos if they were available of the passengers. And it wasn't just a name on the wall, but really gave a story to the face and the name. And that's been something that people have raved about. It was a very small change. But, you know, again, our staff really honed in on the stories and built them out a little bit further. So you can learn about all the passengers and get more of an intimate story about them instead of just, you know, what their fate was. So I think that's been a nice positive shift for us. It was very small, but again, most people have really been excited about it, and it was fun for us to put it together as well.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead. Okay, I was just going to say that the Buena Park, California RMST exhibit, they really emphasized stagecraft there, and they had actors who assumed the roles of various personalities. And the high point of the whole tour among all the exhibits was a room where you went in that had benches laid out in the general shape of a lifeboat. And it was dark, and once everybody boarded the lifeboat, they did a media display depicting the final moments of Titanic. And watching numerous tellings of this story, it was told with such emotion that people were just visibly shook when they left that. They knew the story of Titanic. They'd seen the movie. This was nothing new to them, but to sit them down in a lifeboat and walk them through the final seconds, that just, and then after the lifeboat display, you went into the room where the names of the Titanic passengers lived and died. It left people emotional when they left the exhibit.
You've got to engage your audience.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Is that particular exhibit still open these days, or was that just a short term?
The Buena Park. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll let Bretton talk to it.
No, go ahead. You saw it more times than I did. I only saw it once.
Well, the Bretton Park, the Buena Park exhibit was unfortunately demolished in favor of a butterfly atrium that the city of Buena Park decided they needed. Yeah, it's a shame, but I was very sad to see it go, and I particularly think that it's a shame that Los Angeles lost a permanent Titanic exhibit, because like Vegas, people go there as a tourist destination. They may not go specifically for Titanic. They go there for other things, but then they can see Titanic as well. I thought it was very beneficial, and I was very sad to see that particular exhibit close in that area. But anyway,
yeah,
that's
definitely a better experience than the temporary ones. I mean, we just spend a lot more time and energy building those out, so that it is sad always when those things have to go.
All right. I've got a. Did George fall off?
Yeah, I think George left.
Okay. I wanted to ask him a question before he left, and did we cover for his benefit why this Marconi apparatus is an important artifact and deserves special attention? We've mentioned it several times. I don't think we've ever explained it to anyone on here who may not be as acquainted with it. He may be acquainted with it, I don't know.
Well, you know, I would say he definitely has more than enough information. I see in the chat box that he actually has provided his contact information, you know, to everyone as well too. So.
Oh, I see.
Sounds like Chico's trying to say hi, Cliff.
I'm just going to have to put myself on mute a minute.
Now, you know, has there already been any more solidified plans in terms of the expedition next year, gentlemen? I know it's
the dates are being finalized right now. I'm not going to share that publicly. I share it offline, but just given some people and their affinity to look into these things, I think we've discussed all these groups. But that's really it. I mean, we were fortunate to have spent a lot of time, and I know Parks and Dr. Gallo probably hated me at the time, but we put together an incredible plan with the team last year. And for all intents and purposes, we're ready to go. There's certainly been some updates and small things that we've changed over the last handful of months, but really the only thing we've been doing is changing the dates on the contracts and rolling things forward. And that's really just a testament to how well the entire team performed last year. So unfortunately, I don't have any exciting updates for you, but I think it's just because we had such a well-founded plan and we were ready last year. So it's kind of just crossing I's and dotting T's and adding a 1 to it instead of a 0.
There we go. I mean, just like anything else, it's always one step at a time at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I did have somebody actually ask me about this. Parks, you might be able to answer this better than I, obviously. In terms of the Marconi device itself, is it, in your opinion, do you think could it actually be functionable again if someone was inclined to try to restore it, or would the components probably be too rusted out?
So the wireless apparatus, the wireless telegraph apparatus on a whole consisted of a receiving section, a receiving apparatus, and a transmitting apparatus. The receiving apparatus was destroyed during the sinking. It's gone. Okay. The transmitting apparatus was protected within the confines of the silent room. It was a soundproof room, and because of the soundproofing that was installed in the walls, it survived the hydrodynamic forces that were going through the deck house during the sinking, and it survived the sinking. And then over the years, nature did its work, and it ate away the walls and revealed this beautifully preserved apparatus. Now, the apparatus consists of several components. I don't think that we need to, it's my opinion, and I'm not speaking for RMST or for the extraction plan in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking completely theoretically now. The transmitting apparatus consisted of several components, some of which I don't believe we need to recover, and in fact would be hazardous to recover. Like for instance, the batteries for the emergency set, those are acid-filled batteries, and in wood containers. I don't know if they would be worth recovering today. I've been pushing to what I would consider the heart of the transmitting apparatus, and that is the motor generator set. This was 3 major components on a common bed plate. One is the motor, the DC motor, and as a DC motor, it is typical for the period and not special on its own, but since it's mounted to the common bed plate, I would recover that. The alternator that created the alternating current that was necessary for generation of a telegraph spark. And then the most important component is the disc discharger, which was in a teak box. We found it was open. We could see the disc discharger inside, answered a lot of my questions about the specific set that was installed aboard Titanic. And these 3 components are not only mounted on a common bed plate, but they also share a common shaft that the motor drives the alternator, drives the disc discharger. So that is what, as a minimum, I would like to recover. And here, Cliff, as a past electrician, when you're talking about motors and alternators of that period, these cast iron housings, with their windings and everything, they can't, first of all, you have to make a decision. Do you want to restore it? If someone makes the decision that this artifact, should it be successfully recovered? Should it be restored or not? Is it better to leave it in the condition we brought it up from the wreck and halt that moment in time? Or do we try to restore it to working condition? I'm fine with either decision. I can see the benefits of each. But let's say we decide we want to attempt to restore it. The motor and the alternator would have to be rebuilt. You could use the original cast iron housing. You would have to do all new windings, basically you know, the brushes, everything would have to be newly made. But you could, in theory, restore that to where you could apply power to it and have it generate a spark again. And if you generate a spark, I'm sorry that I said the term Titanic's voice, because I've seen it take on a life of its own since then. To me now it's like this Ship of Dreams thing that Don Lynch made up one day. It took off and took a life of its own, but it literally is what people last heard of Titanic before she disappeared. So it is her voice, and we can hear that again should we make that decision. If we don't make the decision to restore it, that's fine. We still have her voice. We can't hear it, but we still have what generated her voice. Then there's other things like switchboards, regulators. These are all very interesting looking artifacts. They're not as utilitarian as the motor or the alternator. You know, they have the dials and the switches from that period, so they would display well in a museum setting. The condensers, I don't know if we need to bring those up. And the only reason why I would argue to bring the transformer up, it's a big galvanized steel tub that was filled with insulating oil, and then you had the windings of the transformer immersed in that. The interest there would be that it was the transformer that broke down the night before the disaster in Phillips against the guidelines given by the Marconi maintenance manual, which said, leave it alone, it'll be fixed when you come back to port. He decided to fix it himself. And because he fixed it himself, Titanic's wireless was 100% on the night of the disaster. So it's the story behind that transformer that makes it a candidate for recovery, not as its technical worth. We can always simulate a transformer to help drive the spark generation, but it's the story behind that makes it. And there's other smaller components that make up the entire apparatus. We may not need to recover all of them, but you know, there's a priority list depending upon how it goes. You know, when you get on site, how's the recovery going? You know, what can you conceivably get? You know, those are decisions will be made at that time. So it is good to plan based on prioritization of the various components. And then once you get there, you'll see what you can or cannot recover safely.
Definitely.
So can it be restored?
So how large is this?
Well,
How do you
the
plan to exhibit it?
well, I'll let Bretton answer the latter question. But the approximate length, and I've got the numbers upstairs in my.
Are we talking like a dining room table size?
Oh, no. It's, well, dining room table size, yes. Actually, the one that I'm sitting at right now, which is about 5 feet long, I'd say would be about a good size. Yeah. I mean, it is a major piece. It is a major recovery. Yeah. And the switchboards are the size of a I'm trying to think of something I can compare it to. Like this.
Okay.
Whatever that is, that's the size of the switchboards.
So I also work as an interior designer, and I'm just curious, how do you plan to move this equipment out of the ship?
Well, that's going to be.
Do you do that through a door, or do you? Have
no, there's no doors. I'm not going to speak to the specifics of the die plan because I don't know them.
Oh, okay.
But just speaking generally, just to give you an idea of the environment that this is in, the interior walls in the whole deck structure are all down. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's really remaining is a section of wall right up against the motor generator set. Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's still standing is because there are 2 steel rods going from overhead to deck that were used to help support these heavy cast iron switchboards. So they form a bit of a barrier, but there's no real wall. I think the dive plan would have to account for these bars and how they're going to get around them, or do they cut them and pull it down so that they can get to it and remove the switchboards. Switchboards are bolted to these iron bars. They may end up bringing up the switchboard still bolted to these bars. I don't know. And then you have the access of this bed plate, which is too big to go out any existing
Open space.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the word for an opening. So they have to enlarge, possibly, again, I don't know the specifics of the dive plans, I'm speaking theoretically, but I would think that you would have to enlarge the area of the overhead around it so that you can have access to it and retrieve it. That overhead already is about, the area you would have to cut is already about 75% already collapsed. So essentially what you would have to do is enlarge that hole a little bit. And as we're talking now, nature could have enlarged that hole for us already. I don't know. But I don't want to go any farther into this because you would have to get into the specifics of the dive plan, which I can't speak to. But that's just generally the environment that you're looking at right now.
Just one question there, Parks. The transformer, I imagine that will be, in terms of weight, it will be very large. A hefty piece of machinery to move.
Well, I mean, compared to other artifacts that RMST has brought up, it's not excessive.
Okay.
It's just it's a matter of safely getting it out of the deck house would be more of a concern than anything.
Yeah.
And then I'll take the exhibition question really quickly because I'm a little late for my 2 o'clock. But what we tend to do afterwards is we have a couple of third parties that are working on the restoration and conservation of the artifacts themselves. Ideally, we'd love to have it out shortly after the expedition, but it would still be maintained in a water environment. There would be chemicals to make sure it's stable, but that would allow us to sort of showcase it in, potentially at Belfast, right after the expedition. From there, given that it's a number of materials, right? Something that's just metal or just wood is easier to conserve than something that has a mixed componentry. It will end up going back to a third party, and that could take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So ideally, we get to showcase it for about 12 months after the expedition and get that around the world in a few places. And then afterwards, it will go into conservation. So we're sure that everything can stay for years to come. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, but I think, coming off of the expedition, we would love first and foremost to have people be able to see it and then see what a successful extraction it hopefully will be. But again, there is definitely going to be a waiting period following that initial run where we have to make sure that it is stable. And on that, guys, I'm really sorry I have to jump, but thank you so much for the time. If there's any questions or anything we can follow up with, we're happy to. I'm happy to post to the group the current plan that we have so far and some of the comments around that. And you guys can take a look at it. And again, if there's any questions, myself or anyone on the team is happy to sort of field those.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Bretton.
Thank you for taking the time out to speak with us.
So definitely, though, I'd say in a lot of ways, at least from what I've seen on the initial plans and such, speaking from a non-scientific point of view, Leighton, some of the extraction thoughts that I've seen, it's almost the same as doing laparoscopic surgery more than anything else. So it's almost like going to be playing the game of operation with a device about like this. Then again, I'm not like I said, I'm not a scientist, and I've just kind of been watching just a few articles and kind of connecting the dots between at least 6 to 7 sources just to look and see which one has the more common, non-biased approach on the whole situation.
Well, I'm sort of only familiar with the wireless from the Father Brown double exposure picture, where it's just some sort of desktop thing. So to me, I know the Spens used it because I bought their telegrams from Mr. Booth, but it was just, I just thought, you're going after a little thing like this big, this little desktop thing, and we do the dots and the dashes, and I'm like, why bother? Is what my initial reaction to the whole thing is. But now that I understand from talking to you, Parks, that it's a much bigger equipment, and there's a lot of things that I, as a person who is often at the Mac store, know what goes on behind the scenes, and so that's kind of interesting that there is this extra stuff that was somewhere not seen that was creating the device that is seen that makes it work. So, I mean, there was more to the little thing that does the dots and the dashes, is what I'm suggesting. That,
yes, what you're describing was the Marconi room. That was all wiped away by the sinking.
Oh, really? So there's nothing left of that room too?
Nothing. It's a waste now. The walls, everything. It's a wide open space with a couple of mounds of silt that might have debris under them, but it appears that everything.
So you're not even going to get anything from that room, is what?
No. Well, nothing from that room in that room, but I got a glimpse in 2000 in Jim's 2001 or 5 imagery, one or the other, of what might be one of the keys that they did the dits and the das with, in a debris pile located elsewhere. In Britannic, the tuner that you see in the little box that you're talking about, washed out into the grand staircase during the Britannic sinking. And we found it there on a pillar in the staircase, which is now, since Britannic's lying on her side, it's now a shelf instead of a vertical pillar. The tuner is sitting right there, ready to be recovered. And there are discussions right now about recovering that Marconi tuner. But the fact that it washed out of the Marconi room in Britannic and ended up in the grand staircase gives me, an idea of what happened to the remains of Titanic's Marconi room when the water pushed it out. This room that we're talking about recovering was, say, the high power section that created the electrical spark. That room has never been imaged. We have no idea. We had no idea before Jim Cameron got into it in 2001 what Titanic's Marconi installation looked like, because each installation was done by a local Marconi engineer, and it was done to his whim according to the kind of ship or the room that he was allocated to build it in. So the Marconi company had no records of it. We don't have any schematics. We didn't have anything. We learned from the wreck in this particular area. And also, right now, that installation is the only known surviving 5 kilowatt marine wireless telegraph station in existence today. So there are 2. There's one in Britannic, but we haven't seen it yet.
But when because I don't consider myself an expert on the Titanic. I just have a prism through it because of my relatives that were on board, and I never advertise myself as a expert, but I do clip articles, and I do. So this is the first time I'm hearing the story of the wireless from this perspective, whereas the media seems to imply that you're just getting this desktop set, and I know, but I think that's sort of important to educate the public about, is what I've seen those little dots and dashes equipment. In fact, I have one in my office downstairs, and so I was saying to myself, what is so fascinating about 1912 stuff? Because that ship wasn't built with solid gold fixtures. It was designed to be like a hotel with, hotel service stuff. It was never meant to be one of a kind, equipment in there. And so what you're talking about is something, there are only 2 examples existing, one in the Britannic and one on the Titanic that have survived. All the rest have been, as they got aged out or decommissioned, got thrown away. So that's sort of interesting, but I don't understand how that escaped the attention of the media. There's a lot
Oh,
of things that escape the attention of the
we,
media.
we could have a whole conversation about why the media doesn't get things right, but
Yeah, but
it's you know, it's very interesting. Everybody, like, you see articles, you see media articles about Titanic artifacts, and what do they show? They show plates with designs on them. They show you know, things that are like the cherub statue from the staircase, something recognizable. But you know, and this is one thing it's always got me, as you look at shipwrecks, a lot of times you don't find those finely carved things, those, you know, visually astounding artifacts. You find common things like a light bulb socket or a doorknob, or those little pieces that make up everyday life. That's normally what you see in shipwrecks. The fine things don't always survive, and every once in a while they do. Everybody focuses their attention on them. But a story of the ship, the story of the times, the story of the people in their everyday lives aboard the ship can be told by the most innocuous things. This Marconi transmitter is completely utilitarian. It's like the fuse box in your home, or if you're at a building, the generator that's locked in some kind of room that the public never sees, but it provides a vital service. I mean, the wireless was Titanic's link to the outside world in her dying moments. This was the most important thing aboard, and this apparatus that we're going after was not seen by anybody. It was muffled because it made noise. You know, put in a soundproof room. It was, you know, they took extra care that nobody knew that it was there. That it was.
How do you make this accessible to a public, you know, that's spoiled by everyday technology? I'm sure the wow factor of what this massive thing had to do so simply.
Well, that's going to be the challenge of the exhibit. Whoever the exhibit coordinator is going to be that has to display this, they have to be able to relate the story of why you should be amazed at this boring looking thing, this rusty utilitarian motor. A transformer is just a tub with a flat top on it and a couple of contacts coming out from it. But when you tell the story about how the wireless failed the night before the disaster, and Phillips was supposed to, by the manual, leave it alone and go to battery power, which would have decreased his range significantly to a point where they might not have even been able to raise Carpathia. But instead, he decided, I'm going to try and fix it. And it took him 6 hours to do it because he didn't know what he was doing. He first thought it was a problem with the condensers. He took the condensers apart. That is also a tub full of oil with glass plates inserted into it. And there's 4 of them. He went through each of those. He pulled these messy plates out, dripping in oil, and inspected them, looking for a crack that he thought what it was, and it wasn't. And then he turned his attention to the transformer. And when they pulled that out and looked at it, they found a break in the insulation, the secondary winding, and they fixed that up and patched it up, put it back in, and it worked. But they spent several hours, you know, fumbling around, doing something.
This is a completely new story to me. I've only been following the Titanic for the last 40 years or whatever it was.
And that's how you make this artifact interesting. You tell stories, just like you were saying, the stories are what makes Titanic Titanic.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to get an artifact. It's not enough to have an expert say, this is an important artifact. You know, who the fuck is Park Stephenson anyway? But to tell the story behind this artifact, whenever somebody sees this artifact, then
this is an artifact that Phillips actually fixed.
Yes,
this is something that he fixed.
He fixed it on the spot.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So in fact, you know, there's actually a book that came out. It was printed in England years ago, but it's a full transcription of all the Marconi messages.
Oh yes, Dr. What's his name? Mr. Booth. What was his name again? His first name. Yeah, I remember bidding on.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, I bid on the Spend auction, on the Spend Marconigram, and one of them I lost to the Postal Museum in Germany or something. But I was in Virginia. This was before the internet, and I was in someone's house in Virginia, in Charles City, Virginia, on a phone, you know, like trying to like call in to Christie's in London to bid for this thing, which I got, you know, which was nice.
Good.
Yeah, but it's an interesting story, and he was an interesting gentleman. How he found the I guess when Marconi Company got nationalized or something, they were throwing all the records out into a dumpster, and then he walked by it, and they made triplicates of every time a signal was transmitted, there was some sort of paperwork that had to be transcribed, and then the one was sent back to the Marconi archives where they were, you know, it's amazing that they would throw something out like that. Yeah.
Well, that was a quick transition. I was working with the Marconi Company archivist at that time, and it was a quick transition, and they had no choice but to throw stuff out. But
really,
she the person I worked with, she did a great job for me looking for everything that I pointed her to before it all went away.
Now, do any of you guys know Joan Adler of the Strauss Family Historical Society?
I do not.
Yeah, well, she has a very interesting story how she got involved in this whole thing with the Titanic, because in the early 80s, Federated Department Store took over Macy's, and the Strauss family had been keeping all their personal family papers in Isidore Strauss's office at Macy's on Herald Square. And one day after the corporate takeover, they lost everything, all of their personal papers, everything. And so the family put out an ad in the Times book review section in a little 1-inch thing saying, looking for an archivist to replicate a lost archive. And so she called them up. She had no idea who these people were, and they told her the sad story. And she goes, you know, before I do anything, why don't I just call up whoever it is that has the archives, you know, now, because they wouldn't let the Strausses into the building, any member of the Strausses into the building, because it was so adversarial at the time. And she met some guy who said, sure, I'll give them to you. And so she got her husband in a car, and they drove into the city, and they just loaded everything up right then and there. And she was able to save it all. And the family was so thrilled by her that she's actually now the curator of the entire Strauss family archives. And the Strauss family is amazing because they've been, you know, a very large family, and they've been involved in public philanthropy for many generations. So she keeps track of all of what they do. But the number one thing that irritates them is that Isidore and Ida Strauss are depicted as speaking with European accents in every Titanic movie, every Titanic play, when in fact they grew up in Makron, Georgia, you know. And so I went with them to a special, I don't know how many of us were there, screening of the play, and we got to talk to like Mary Yeston and I forgot Roger Stone afterwards, and the family asked, why did you depict them speaking with a, you know, German accent? And yeah, we know that they grew up in Georgia, but it's part of the story now that they speak this way.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Cliff, Ismay was a tool for some storytellers in previous generations, and especially Joseph Goebbels, who jumped on it to make Ismay the epitome of British aristocracy and evil capitalism. And because of the portrayal, Ismay's portrayals ever since have suffered. The Ismay we see on screen now, I would venture to say, bears no resemblance to the actual man himself, to the man who died a month after the Olympic died, you know. So anyway,
then there's the story.
It's funny you should mention that. I'm actually writing about a book about Bruce Ismay now, and it's Ismay, by the way. It's not Ismay. So next time you say James,
sorry. I have this weird American accent.
Local. Yeah, exactly.
Say it again.
Ismay with a Z or Z, as you would say.
A Z.
So it's spelled S, but it's pronounced with a Z.
Can you pronounce his wife's surname?
I would say Shefflin.
Yeah, it's a hard one too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm writing a book about Bruce right now, so I'm trying to portray the different side of Bruce that's always been left out of the movies and subsequent documentaries. So there's a lot to be put right, and I'm hoping to do that. Well, thanks for mentioning that, Parks.
And then
Well,
there's a story about Lorraine Allison's nanny, right? When did that like awful story come out about her, the nanny being a murderess? And do any of you remember
Oh,
that?
Oh, I know who you're talking about, but
Yeah, but Lorraine Allison's nanny was like accused of being a murderess all throughout the 80s, you know, or something. And then it turned out to be a wrong person. Like, we're sorry, all these historians we're sorry, it was the wrong, you know.
I
Yeah,
This is what
I've heard
makes
similar
the-
stories.
This is what makes everything so fascinating, because you keep discovering, and the story keeps changing, and it keeps evolving. So, and it thus keeps everyone fascinated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely. I mean, you know, and at the end of the day, that's where the next round of inspirations always seems to pop up from, and you never know what doors and even what curious minds are going to learn something new along the way, anyways.
Well, the next generation of Titanic researchers is already hard at work.
Yeah.
I feel them clawing at my back. So we need to give them, you know, the results of our investigations, our thoughts on it, our conclusions, so that they can build upon it. Do them a service, and they can take it up. And I don't think anybody in this current generation feels that we have solved Titanic. All these documentary titles with last word or final, now, you know, that's all entertainment bullshit. Nobody who's involved in this believes that we will have the last word on any of this. What best we can hope for is to have a good word that we can pass down, so that eventually somebody will arrive at the last word. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but
You know, William and I used to have a very good friend, Howard Nelson, here on the Titanic Heritage Trust in England. He had a few good sayings that we both liked to hear him say. But one of his favourite sayings was, when he was speaking about Titanic, you had to have been there to know exactly what had happened.
yeah, yes.
And then as Park said, I'm back on this topic again. You know, the squabbling really doesn't help, I don't think, future generations. I mean, it'd be, there's nothing that prohibitive from everyone working together again. You know, I think we've played by the rules the company has. We've got no hard feelings really against the worker bees our same level at NOAA or at National Park Service. We still, you know, we're friends. It's upper levels. So I think that's more appropriate going forward with Titanic, instead of always making it this contentious thing, which is not the intent of the company. So.
Step one, kick out all the lawyers.
There we go.
That's a good
You know,
start.
it's a very good point, you know, Parks, because this policy thing that just went into play, and I think it's France, the U.S., England, Canada, this latest thing, the agreement, and not ratified, but signed. How in the world do they expect to protect the site by having committees in all these countries that you're supposed to be responsive to? I just boggles the mind, you know. One thing that may happen soon is that Canada may be extending its is it the economic zone, but Titanic may well be within their territorial waters, which will make it very interesting on top of everything else, but that may well happen. So.
Well, I mean, in the worst case scenario, this was something both Cliff, Dave, and I have joked about at times. If worse comes to worse, we know Cliff to be quite the gentleman and such. We'll just let the lawyers know that actually it still belongs to the Ismay family, and then he can decide when who gets to go out and when.
Have the paperwork here.
That's why, Cliff, we expect Cliff to give a leadership gift in the formation of the new Cliff Ismay Titanic Center.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll support that.
As long as you don't run afoul of the Morgans, I guess.
Yes, I was just thinking about the Morgans.
Yep.
Yeah, of course, that's the old story, isn't it? The press, the newspapers, the movies, they're always saying it was Ismay's ship, Ismay owned Titanic, and he wanted to save all the awful stories that was going on, because it wasn't Ismay that owned it; it was Morgan and his shareholders.
Yep.
Right. Anyway, yeah, okay. Well, like I said, I'll go back to my basic thing is Titanic doesn't belong to us.
Yeah.
Doesn't belong to any of us.
Here. Yep.
So we treat it that way. Anyway.
No, that's right.
But I mean, then again, though, even though she doesn't belong to us, I will say this much: I'm glad, at the level of respect that you do show when you guys do go out there and work on the scene. I mean,
that time when Parks was with us, we got it really bothers me right now. We managed to loop a tether around a small piece of Titanic, a small metal piece, which maybe not that important, but we had to pull up, leave because there's a hurricane coming. So the choices were to pull and hopefully, maybe pull a piece of the Titanic up with it, pull and then break the cable or lose the fiber, so you didn't know what was going on. It was horrible. But the thing that got me most, I didn't sleep for days, was that we actually laid a cable down across Titanic, because my nightmare has always been that something, a current, whatever, or a cable sweeps across the bow and pulls that whole railing down. Oh God, I don't even want to think about it. It's enough to make me never want to go back again. But that's how worried we get. I mean, it's not just me, other people too, worried we get about having impact on the ship as it is now. So when you see people that are just saying, oh, they're going to tear into or drill into or whatever, it's couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I have not met a Titanic explorer who did not exercise extreme care with that wreck. That wreck is treated unlike no other shipwreck out there.
Right.
That having been said, even with that care that has been given, the conditions down there are so inhospitable, that every expedition to the wreck has damaged the wreck. There's been inadvertent accidents on every. So when I hear these arguments, well, Cameron did this, or Ballard did this, or Vescovo did this, I'm sorry. It's part of the cost of getting this information that the world wants so badly from the wreck. They want the information. Even the most ardent, you're grave robbing, I don't want you down there, why don't you just turn the lights out and leave it alone? They still want information from Titanic. They still want us to be going down there and getting information from it. And there is a cost to that information. And luckily, because the explorers who've been there care so much about the wreck, and I don't know if it's because they cared about the wreck beforehand or going down there made them care about the wreck, but they have. The damage they've done has been accidental, incidental, and minor in comparison to what could be done. So I bemoan the damage that was done, but I do not worry about it so much, because it's the cost of doing business down there. And Dave, I'm sorry you lost sleep over it, but you know the guys that were driving that ROV. Yeah. They were the best at what they did, and despite their best efforts, that cable still got caught in that piece of combing.
But they got us out of it.
You got us out of it. You didn't pull the combing off, which I thought was going to happen. That combing is still there. And that combing was broken by the ship splitting in half anyway. So it was already damaged, not our fault. Yeah. And we retrieved the ROV. It went on to collect more information.
Never laid a cable down across the bow. Bothered me. Still bothers me.
Yeah.
But anyway. I think you're right. It's like footprints on the moon. I mean, that's what are you going to do? You can't. There's going to be some impact on the area for sure.
And in a lot of ways, this is almost like the early days before the Mercury program officially launched. There's going to be high risk standards no matter what, and it's just a matter of making sure that you're ahead of those risk standards at the end of the day, just to avoid any other circumstances like the cable on the wreck and things like that.
Well, we can talk. Even when you plan well for the risks, deep water exploration can overpower even the best laid plans. It can overpower the best technology. I'll address the incident from 2019, which the press made a big deal about. And I know that it was encouraged by some people who had a vested interest in seeing Victor criticized. But we did hit a piece of the bow railing that was already halfway fallen and sticking out perpendicular from the forecastle. And we weren't even intending to be that close to the wreck itself. We had a NOAA restriction of 20 meters from the wreck, but the currents were such, it literally pushed us into the wreck. And Victor was doing everything he could to keep from hitting it, but we were essentially being blown down the length of the forecastle without being able to push away from it. And we hit it, and we dislodged it a little bit more, didn't knock it off. Victor showed the imagery of it to Judge Clark, and based on what she had read in the press, when she saw what happened, she goes, "That's it? That's what happened?" And she said, "That's yeah. I'm sorry. That's not that's no big deal." Yeah. But and that made us both feel bad. I had a view of it right outside my viewport, and I saw these railing stanchions going, and I went, "Oh no!" but we couldn't do anything about it. It just was that. Anatoly is one of the most experienced sub drivers around the wreck. He's hit it several times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We almost there was a moment in 2010 where we were driving the ROV in the debris field, and the ROV drivers saw the circulating pumps, the section of turbine room that had blown out clear of the wreck, and the circulating pumps went with it, and they were perfectly preserved because they were not made of ferrous metals that would corrode. They looked brand new. They looked like the day they were put in there. And they were looking at it, and I was in the ROV shack at the time, and the ROV pilot goes, "Wait a minute, hold on, pan up real quick," and panned up, and they were right there against the double bottom because it was a curved section of hull, and they were so focused on looking at this that they briefly lost situational awareness. And somebody remembered and looked up, and they were right there about to hit the double bottom hanging over them.
Oh my God.
There are, people say, "I want to know how many blades are on the prop on the stern, the center propeller. I want to know if it's 3-bladed or 4-bladed." Well, let me tell you, it's not worth finding out. Who cares? To me, it's the most uninteresting argument. And the reason why I say that is because to get in a position to even try to image that in the sediment, it's buried in the sediment. And despite the fact that ground penetrating sonar has its problems, even attempt to ground penetrate sonar for this, you have to get right under that counter stern of Titanic. And I guarantee you, no matter which way the currents are flowing, on the day that you get under that stern, they will be pushing you into the stern. It's just the way it is. And I would not risk a submersible, either manned or unmanned, just to find out how many blades are on the center turbine.
Is the blade issue still a question?
Yes, it is. Oh. I know that. Oh God, brain fart! Somebody help me out here. The UK researcher who I've met, I know, but I can't think of his name right at the moment, who wrote the paper.
Let's see, we had Paul Lee?
No, not Paul Lee.
No.
A respectable UK researcher.
Inside.
Hold on a second. I'll get his book here. Okay, Mark Churnside.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
God, I had a brain. I'm getting old.
That's I get those things all the time.
Mark Churnside made probably the best argument you can make, offered up the most complete research you can make to basically come to a conclusion on how many blades are on that propeller. But
Mhm.
it's still not proven. It's the best logic in the world. It's the best evidence in the world. It doesn't qualify as proof. It qualifies as the best educated guess we have. And I believe him. I totally buy in to his argument, and I'm willing to accept it and move on. But if you really want to prove it, you've got to go down there and look at the actual thing. And I'm saying that the risk is too great. Knowing that environment and the wreck and that area of the wreck, that's a dangerous place to be, and I don't think it's worth it. I'm happy with Mark Churnside's argument and leave it at that. Don't send me to go try and find out how many blades are on the stupid thing.
You know what I find fascinating about the Titanic is, like, by today's cruise ship standards, all the bathrooms are en suite to the cabin. So even if you were, a relatively rich person at the time, there were very few cabins that had private bathrooms that were associated. So how did you and your maid and the stewardess get you to the first class ladies' bathroom if you wanted to take a bath in the middle, at some point? That culture that doesn't exist anymore. And it's just
now I'm not the expert on passenger things, but I just, as a general overall statement, you can't understand Titanic unless you understand 1912.
Yeah.
That world does not exist today. We've lost touch with that world. You have to spend a lot of work trying to get your head into what 1912 was.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. And I don't think anybody can do it completely. It's not a somewhere in time kind of thing where you can just keep thinking about it until you're there. But you will inevitably draw false conclusions about Titanic's history unless you if you try to see it from a 1912 perspective.
Yeah, and that's what I try to explain to the kids when I used to do my school program about that, because they have no understanding of the world of 1912, or nor did the teachers, in fact. So you have to put them in the place and time and the social structure that exists at that time, how rank was implied or wasn't implied, and how people interacted. And it's very foreign to us, especially for Americans in general.
It's interesting when I go to, I've been lucky enough to be invited to the Grand Hotel in Mackinac Island to give a Titanic presentation there. And it's interesting to see that the Grand Hotel still enforces formal wear for dinner. In fact, after 6 p.m., you have to be dressed to walk about the hotel. And it's interesting to see the reactions of modern people faced with that. You're restricting my freedom. I can wear what I want. No, this is not
anymore.
The world that this represents, people want it to make that extra effort for dinner time. Or to go to Sunday school, or things like that you may still remember our generation being involved with. But there's just little things like that in total create a whole nother world. There you go.
Oh, wonderful. And she has Emily Post has the connection to Tuxedo Park.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, her father was one of the Price was one of the famous architects of some of the houses in Tuxedo Park, and the Shefflins also had a connection to Tuxedo Park. Did you know that Bruce Ismay was in a little sailboat race in one of the lakes in Tuxedo Park?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
I'm just impressed if this is the book of etiquette, and this is the book of etiquette for men.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's that plus that. It's
no, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Are there more pictures?
A little bit extra,
Yeah. Now that's picture in the book.
No, I mean, I still, well, one of the things that I do is I work as an interior designer, and I work for a lot of people with hedge funds and stuff, and suddenly they find themselves in possession of a beautiful old mansion. And then I have to get them up to speed on how to run it, how to set the tables, how to, do this kind of what they call program for living that involves. And so there are a lot of people who do get into it eventually. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know how to do that. And that's kind of fun. So.
Well, and there's other things too, like Cliff, I'll address this to you. In Titanic, in the silent room, the transformer, the high voltage leads, which could carry as much as 20,000 volts, went up to a couple of air choke coils. Those copper wires, heavy copper wires that ran from the transformer carrying that high voltage had absolutely no insulation on them. If you were in the silent room and the seas were a little rough, you could bump up against them very easily. There was no shielding, no insulation. They were just there.
Not even a cordon of shellac along the cables.
No, nothing. They were bare copper wires, and that's how you find them in the wreck today. Not a trace of insulation on them. It's a different time. It's a different time.
Like the way they also like to see the light bulbs. They didn't want shades on them.
Yes.
They liked those hallways with a light bulb just sticking out.
Yes, and exposed wiring was actually preferred over concealed wiring because it was a status symbol. It demonstrated they had electricity. To us, we take great pains to hide exposed wiring, but they did not.
Well, see, one of the other things that we forget around that time period was the idea that lighting fixtures became permanent on a tablescape, whereas in the Edwardian world, in the Victorian world, they were taken away during the daylight hours to be cleaned and refueled. And so then the tablescape would be reaccommodated to in the evening hours as dusk started coming in and the servants brought in your lighting equipment for the evening. Then you would rearrange the tablescape. But the idea now, when you do a room, the lighting fixture on the table stays there permanently. So if you were to take a Victorian person and have them spend a day with you and see that the lamp doesn't move, it doesn't get taken to the kitchen to be cleaned, so there's that famous Father Brown picture about did those tables in the first class dining room actually have the candle lights on them, with the little, or are they taken off during lunch?
So anyway.
Anyway, I have to go. It was very nice meeting you all, and I'm sure. So I very much enjoyed being here, and thank you very much for having me.
Bye, Leighton.
Glad you could make it.
Thanks.
And actually, I have to scoot too, I hate to say.